If I had known that a single cup of coffee could strip away 65 years of dignity, I would have stayed in bed that morning. I was sitting quietly at the breakfast table in my daughter Emily's bright kitchen, gently holding a warm mug between my hands. She had just brewed a fresh pot, extra strong, just the way her husband preferred it. I expected a peaceful morning. I thought nothing could go wrong. Then my grandson Dylan spoke up as casually as if he was asking me to pass the butter. "Grandma, can I borrow your credit card again? I need something for my gaming setup. It's only $5,000. I didn't even blink. I simply said no. And that's when Emily lost it. She didn't start yelling right away. Instead, she let the silence fill the room, heavy and toxic. Then, without any warning, her hand shot forward. Not to hit me, no, she wouldn't go that far, but to do something worse. She tipped my coffee mug straight into my lap, the scalding liquid burning my legs. I gasped and jumped up, the ceramic mug crashing to the floor, shattering into pieces. The hot coffee soaked through my thin pajama pants, making my thighs sting and my pride wither. Emily didn't even flinch. "If you're going to be selfish, maybe it's time you leave," she said, folding her arms like some heartless manager delivering bad news. "Either give Dylan what he wants or find somewhere else to live. We're not a charity, Mom." Charity. That word hit me harder than the coffee ever could. I stood there, dripping and burned, looking her straight in the eye. For a second I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her face. But no, it was cold calculation. She was weighing me like a burden, deciding I was no longer worth keeping around. $5,000, I repeated softly, my voice shaking. "For a child's toy?" Emily's lips twisted. "It's not that much. You've got plenty of money since Dad passed. I don't see why you're making this difficult." "I've been covering the house utilities," I said quietly. "And I never once asked you to pay for my prescriptions." She rolled her eyes. "You're lucky I let you stay here at all after your surgery. Remember? You couldn't even walk. I've been managing your life ever since. And now this." I wanted to scream, not just from the physical pain but from the betrayal. They had never really helped me. They had positioned themselves. Emily's help always came with strings. No, with ropes that tightened and cut deeper over time. In that moment I finally saw it for what it was. She wasn't my daughter anymore. Not truly. She saw me as leverage, as a resource, as some old woman who had outlived her usefulness. Behind her, Dylan looked completely uninterested, still waiting for my credit card like it was already his. My hands trembled as I grabbed a paper towel and dabbed at my legs. No one moved to help. My breathing grew shallow, my heart pounded in my ears. Emily crossed her arms tighter and said with that same cruel smirk, "You either hand over the card or you're out by the end of the day." There was not a request, a threat. I glanced down at the spilled coffee pooling around the broken mug. One sharp shard lay near my foot, its delicate floral pattern still visible. A small piece of something once beautiful like me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I slowly walked to the sink, rinsed my burned hands under the cold water and shut off the tap. Then I said, "I'll be gone before sunset." Emily blinked. I think she expected a fight. But what she didn't understand, and what I finally remembered, was this. Staying quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Some debts are paid with silence and with finality. The door clicked shut behind me as I sat alone in the guest room. My legs still burned, but that wasn't the worst pain. What hurt more was knowing she meant it. She wanted me gone, not because she couldn't afford to help, but because I no longer served a purpose. I sat on the edge of the bed, my bed where I had rested after my hip surgery, where Emily used to tuck me in each night, treating me like her mother again, not like a burden. She had called it temporary. I didn't argue back then. I was grateful. Foolishly grateful. Now I saw the trap for what it was. She handled my prescriptions, grocery lists, utilities, all for her own convenience. She said she'd take care of my banking so I could rest. She told the neighbors I was too tired to socialize, when really she never even told me they had come by to visit. And I let her. I let her help me straight out of my independence. I moved slowly to the closet. My suitcase was still up on the top shelf, dusty but untouched. I pulled it down carefully, steadying myself on the dresser. My hip ached, but I didn't cry out. Pain was familiar. What hurt was the silence. No one knocked, no one came to check on me. Emily had screamed loud enough for the entire block to hear. Dylan had watched me freeze and stumble for words. But neither cared. Not enough to follow, not enough to ease the blow. I opened the top drawer and pulled out the envelope I had hidden there months ago. Beneath the spare linens were my birth certificate, insurance cards, and a printout with my bank's routing number. I hadn't fully known why I saved them at the time, but now I understood. Some part of me always knew this day would come. As I packed, I made no sound. No sobs. No whispers. I carefully folded each piece of clothing, my hands steady and calm. I rolled up my little pouch of jewelry, mostly costume pieces except for one pearl ring that once belonged to my late husband. But it was mine. From the hallway, I could hear the low drone of the television. Emily had settled back into her usual routine, watching one of those home makeover shows she always said were too complicated for me to follow. Dylan was probably in his room with his headphones on, spending someone else's money on the internet. I zipped the suitcase shut and sat back down for a moment, letting my eyes wander around the room. A framed photo of Emily and me from her college graduation still sat on the dresser. She'd insisted I be in that picture. I looked proud back then. But I didn't feel proud now. Now I was simply awake. The doorknob turned briefly, then stopped. They heard me packing. But neither one of them cared enough to come inside. Or maybe they were just hoping I'd slip away quietly so they wouldn't have to face me again. They didn't know me at all. I sat with the suitcase at my feet, my heart pounding like I was back in an ER waiting for bad news. But I already knew the diagnosis. I wasn't broken, I'd been discarded. And with that came a strange sense of freedom. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in months. Henry B., a retired attorney, once my neighbor, still a kind man. I pressed the call button. He picked up on the second ring. "Martha," he said softly, "is everything okay?" "No," I answered, my voice steady, "but it will be." After I hung up with Henry, the house fell into that awful kind of silence. The kind that only exists in places where love used to live. I sat with one hand resting on the suitcase, the other brushing the corner of the nightstand where my reading glasses used to sit. But I hadn't read in weeks. Not since the last time I felt like a person in this house instead of just another item on the shelf. That's when I noticed something. My purse. It felt lighter than usual. I unzipped the front pocket. No wallet, no bank card, no ID. My heart jumped. I opened the second pocket. Then the third. Nothing. My fingers started to tremble as I sat on the edge of the bed, dumping everything out. A few peppermints, some tissues, an old tube of lipstick, but no wallet, no card. I'd had it yesterday, I was sure. I used it to pay for my prescription ointment at the pharmacy. Emily had driven me there. She insisted on holding my purse while I walked slowly. I thought she was being helpful. But now I saw it for what it was. She was creating an opportunity. I could hear her voice from months ago, so casual back then. "Let me take care of your bills, Mom. It'll be easier if everything goes through one account. I'll set up automatic payments. You don't have to worry about a thing. Just focus on healing, okay?" And I let her. I gave her access, the passwords, the accounts. I trusted my daughter. Now, I couldn't even remember the last time I saw a bank statement with my name on it. She had everything switched to paperless, all in the name of simplicity. What a fool I had been. The words sat like acid in my throat. They loved my money more than they ever loved me. I wasn't family. I was a line on a ledger. I slowly walked to the dresser and opened the second drawer. Inside was a little notebook where I used to jot down grocery lists back when I lived alone. On the last page months ago I had scribbled my account numbers, just in case. I stared at the numbers. They were mine. But when was the last time I had seen the card that matched them? I checked my jewelry box, under the mattress, even inside my old Bible. Nothing. They hadn't just asked for my money, they had taken it. I sat back down, dizzy. The burn from the coffee had faded. Now it was something colder that burned inside me, humiliation, thick and bitter. And what made it worse was knowing I had let it happen. I had handed her my independence, thinking she was helping me, thinking she was stepping up. But really she was stepping in, ahead of me, around me, over me. I hadn't seen it clearly until now. Not when she told the bridge club I was too tired to play. Not when she intercepted calls from my bank. Not when she started pre-approving my Amazon orders like I was a child. She had been gently locking every door one by one until I had no way out. That was the part that nearly made me cry. I wasn't weak. I had survived 30 years in the ER, the death of my husband and a shattered hip. But I hadn't survived this with grace. I looked at that graduation photo again. Emily wore that same smug smile even back then. Long before I realized that some daughters don't grow up to love you, they grow up to use your shadow. My phone buzzed. It was Henry. A text. I'm outside. Ready when you are. I stared at the message for a moment, then glanced around the room at all the invisible pieces of trust that had shattered. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving the lie that I still mattered to her. When I finally opened the door, Henry was already halfway up the walkway, moving with a calm kind of urgency. He wore his usual navy windbreaker and carried a sturdy canvas bag like we were just heading out for a picnic. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at me like I was broken. He simply asked, "You ready?" I nodded. The house behind me stayed silent. No doors opening, no footsteps following, no voices calling me back. That silence was the proof. Proof they thought I wouldn't leave. That I couldn't. Henry picked up my suitcase and gently took the smaller tote from my shoulder. "You got everything?" Henry asked as we reached his car. "Everything I still own," I answered softly. He opened the passenger door for me. "Careful with your hip," he said. That simple kindness nearly undid me. Not because it was kind, but because I suddenly realized how long it had been since anyone had shown me kindness without expecting something in return. The drive started in silence. I stared out the window, watching the streets blur past, every turn taking me further away from the house that had stopped feeling like home the day Emily started calculating my worth like a monthly expense. About halfway across town, Henry finally spoke. "You know," he said, "I saw you crying last week." I blinked, surprised. "What?" He didn't glance at me, just kept his eyes on the road. "You were sitting real still out on your balcony holding that little ceramic bird." I didn't want to intrude. I couldn't even recall the bird or the crying. Maybe I had started to cry and stopped. Lately it felt like I was living someone else's life. Smaller, narrower. Henry continued, "I figured something was wrong when you stopped coming to the library." That's when it truly hit me, how far the isolation had gone. Emily hadn't only taken my money. She'd taken my routines, my friendships, even my simple freedom to walk 2 blocks and sip bad coffee with the retired church choir ladies. She didn't lock me in a room. She just made the outside world harder to reach. "You're not the first I've helped like this," Henry said quietly. "A lot of seniors get managed right out of their lives. Happens more often than people want to admit." I said nothing. I couldn't. I was too busy holding back tears that felt like passengers trapped on the wrong train. Henry went on, "I made some calls this morning. There's a place I think you might like. A senior community with independent units. You once told me you liked the one with the koi pond." I turned to him. "That place is too expensive," I whispered. "I saw the brochures before. Emily said it wasn't realistic." Henry let out a dry breath. "Emily also said you needed help ordering your own socks," he replied. "Don't give her authority she never earned." I managed the smallest smile. Then Henry reached into the console and pulled out a slim manila envelope. "Start here. Just a few pamphlets. And we'll be speaking to a financial protection officer too. If what you told me about the missing bank card is true, we may need to act quickly." My chest tightened. It wasn't fear, not panic, not even dread, just the truth finally landing where it belonged. "I never wanted it to come to this," I whispered. "She was my daughter." Henry nodded as he slowed the car at a traffic light. "And I'm sure you loved her deeply," he said. "But sometimes love is just the paper wrapped around poison." I turned my gaze to the window. Somewhere behind me, Emily might have noticed I was gone. Or maybe not. But ahead of me, for the first time in a long while, I saw a gate opening. Not a cage. A door. We pulled up just after 11. The sign read, "Willowbrook Pines." No gold. No pines. Just simple lettering on a weathered board. But beyond it, the grounds looked like something out of a life I used to believe belonged to other people. Hydrangeas blooming, a bench shaded under a willow tree, a koi pond glistening like glass in the sun. Henry parked and switched off the engine, letting the silence settle around us. I stared at the entrance. "I'm not ready," I said softly. "For what?" he asked. "To want this," I whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded. That's what I appreciated about Henry. He never tried to fill the silence with pity or cheap words. He understood that some moments need room to breathe. We stepped into the main lobby and I noticed something right away. The place didn't smell like bleach or sadness. It smelled like lemon balm and fresh-baked rolls. Like living. A woman stood up from the front desk. "You must be Martha," she said with a kind, gentle tone, not overly sweet. "Henry called ahead and said you'd be visiting today." "Welcome." For a moment I almost corrected her. Visiting sounded so final, but something inside me whispered, "Let it be." We toured the courtyard first. Henry walked beside me slowly, letting me choose the pace. We passed a cozy little library, a crafts room, even a yoga class for seniors. I watched two older women laughing as they struggled to roll up their mats, and it struck me, they weren't being managed. They were living. Choosing. Each room had sunlight, every hallway was lined with windows. No one was looking over anyone's shoulder. No one asked permission to go outside. When we reached the koi pond, I stopped. The fish moved gently beneath the surface, unhurried, as if they had nowhere to be. "I used to sit by water like this when I needed to think," I said quietly. "Before all of this." "You still do," Henry replied. We sat in silence for a while. I didn't speak. I simply existed. For the first time in months, I wasn't someone's burden. I wasn't Emily's problem. I wasn't Dylan's bank account. I was just Martha. When we returned inside, the receptionist, her name tag read Lena, led us to a cozy tea room. She brought over a tray with 2 cups of tea, a small plate of lemon cookies, and a brochure. Nothing pushy, no speeches. Just a gentle offering. I wrapped both hands around the warm cup and stared at the brochure. There, in print, was the very thing Emily had told me never to even consider. A studio with a small kitchen and balcony, month to month, no long-term contract. "Don't get your hopes up," Emily once said. "Places like that are for rich retirees, not people like you." But I read the number again. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't impossible. Not if I still had what once belonged to me. Access to my own accounts, control over my own life. "I don't even know if I can afford this," I whispered, mostly to myself. Henry took a slow sip of his tea. "Then let's find out. But first, you file the paperwork. A financial protection order. I'll help you." That word protection landed heavy in my chest. Not because I was weak, but because I was finally done pretending I didn't need protection from my own daughter. I glanced once more at the brochure, then met Henry's steady eyes. "Hey," I said. "Let's start." And just like that, I stepped into a new chapter. One where I finally held the keys again. At Henry's kitchen table, we spread out every document I had left to my name. Insurance cards, old bank statements, a folder marked Medicare that Emily used to mock for being too old-fashioned, and a thin yellow notepad, its pages streaked where tears had once fallen as I scribbled down every suspicious moment I could remember. "I know it's messy," I admitted, "but I tried to keep track." Henry adjusted his reading glasses. "Messy is fine. Truth usually is." He flipped through the first few pages, nodding slowly. Recurring charges from places you never shop. A Netflix profile called Dillmaster. PayPal withdrawals at 3 in the morning. This is good. Very good. I sat straight across from him, my hands folded. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. Only focused. I had something they never expected. Evidence. The bank card was gone, but my memory remained sharp. And now, looking back with clear eyes, the full picture came into focus. Emily had taken control under the mask of love. But it wasn't love, it was strategy. "Do you still have access to a printer?" Henry asked. I nodded. "In Cliff's old study. It's still hooked up to the Dell." "Good. Tomorrow we'll scan everything. Then I'll connect you with a financial abuse specialist. They're discreet. They handle more than just reversing transactions. They build protection cases." He paused, then added gently, "But we'll need to move quickly. Once Emily realizes you're not coming back, she might try to get ahead of this, especially if the accounts are still in her hands." "They are," I said quietly. "At least some of them. But the title to the house." My voice trailed off. Henry looked up sharply. "The house she's living in?" "Yes. It's in my name. Emily had it transferred before my surgery. She said it would make hospital paperwork easier." Henry blinked, then leaned back, letting out a low breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Well now, that changes everything." He stood and pulled down a small lockbox from the shelf behind him. Inside were neatly organized forms with colored tabs poking out like tiny flags. "You need to copy every single document. Every page. Get notarized statements. If you can list exact dates Emily made withdrawals, even better. I nodded, already reaching for my notepad again. My handwriting shook, but my memory held steady. Should I call her? I asked. Tell her I'm filing? No, Henry answered firmly. Let the paperwork speak. It'll say everything better than you ever could. That phrase stayed with me, let the paperwork speak. Let it say all the words I'd swallowed for years. Let it testify to the theft wrapped in hugs, the smothering disguised as care. Let it say what I couldn't. You tried to own me. But I kept the receipts. That night I scanned every page, sorted every folder until midnight. My back ached, my eyes burned, but I didn't stop. Because now I wasn't just surviving. I had a case. And even if they never apologized, the truth would exist. For the lawyers, the courts. For me. Because I was finally putting everything on record. The story they never thought I'd live long enough to tell. Emily didn't know I still had the title deed. She never asked. She simply assumed her temporary guardianship had become permanent, just like everything else she quietly claimed. So when she pulled into the driveway 2 days later and saw a stranger standing in the front yard with a clipboard, I imagine it must have felt like a glitch in her perfect little system. That stranger was Carla, the real estate agent Henry connected me with just yesterday. Professional, discreet, and not one to gossip. Emily stepped out of her car already furious. But I wasn't there. I was exactly where I needed to be, 3 towns over, sitting on the shaded balcony of my temporary apartment at Willowbrook Pines. A glass of iced tea in one hand, and a signed property reassessment form in the other. Henry had dropped it off that morning. I didn't need to be present for the storm, only the paperwork did. Emily called me, of course. 3 times in a row, straight to voicemail. On the 4th I finally answered. Mom, what the hell is going on? There's a realtor here doing a walkthrough of my house. Your house. I repeated. I let the pause hang. Correct. Silence. Then venom. You're not serious. I'm very serious. I could practically hear her pacing. You don't even live here anymore. What is this? Some kind of guilt trip? Are you trying to embarrass me? No, I replied calmly. I'm simply reclaiming what has always been mine. This is my home, she hissed. No, I said again, absolute and steady. It's the home you've been squatting in, managing with money that was never yours. I allowed you to play caretaker. That role is now revoked. You can't just throw us out. Emily snapped. I didn't throw you out, Emily, I said calmly. You told me to leave. The silence that followed was heavy, like soft snowfall, gentle but suffocating. He had no idea I remembered everything. How the deed had been quietly transferred into my name under the excuse of helping with hospital paperwork. How I had signed papers back then without reading closely, trusting her. But there was one thing I had read and remembered. I never gave her full power of attorney. Legally, technically, and morally the house was mine. And now it was being reassessed, prepared for sale, and protected from her. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice low and cold. You're being cruel. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I said the one thing that stopped her completely. You only miss me now because I finally said no. I ended the call. About 30 minutes later, Carla texted me. Evaluation completed. Client Emily attempted to interfere, but I remained professional. Strong potential for resale. We'll follow up tomorrow. Later that evening, Henry called. She tried to reach me too, he said. Left a voicemail full of threats. Let her threaten, I replied. Because for the first time in years I wasn't scared of her anger. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was something far stronger. Certain. Certain that love without respect is just ownership. Certain that family means nothing when built on control. Certain that even if all I had left was this chair, this tea, and my name on one legal document, I was freer than I had ever been in that house. That night I went to bed early. And for the first time in years I locked the door. Not out of fear of what might come in, but because I finally had something worth keeping out. The front doors at Willowbrook Pines are made of thick glass, elegant but solid. You can see out, but no one gets in without permission. That's why I didn't flinch when I saw Emily coming. That morning I was sitting in the community library, reading an article on elder financial abuse that Henry had highlighted for me. My tea sat beside me, cold and bitter, but the words on the page burned hotter. Then the front desk rang my room. There's an Emily here to see you, the receptionist said gently. Shall we bring her in? No, I answered. But you can let her know I'm watching. They didn't ask why. The staff here had seen this kind of thing before. Adult children showing up only when their name was on the paperwork, not the caller ID. I quietly stepped into the sunroom, tucked just off the lobby. From there I could see everything without being seen. Emily stood in the foyer, wearing tight jeans and a furious red blouse, pacing in small circles like a caged lioness. Her face twisted in disbelief, as though the very air in this place offended her. The receptionist approached her again. Emily pointed sharply in my direction, accusing, almost stabbing the air. She had no idea I was behind the tinted glass. She didn't know that for once she was the one on the outside. I stepped back just enough to stay hidden, not out of fear but out of choice. That's a kind of power people like Emily never expect you to reclaim. Not the power to fight, the power to ignore. 10 minutes passed. Then security arrived, calm, professional, not loud or aggressive. A woman in a navy blazer with a name badge approached and spoke softly to Emily, who was now waving her hands and speaking much faster than her own logic could keep up. I watched her point toward the brochure stand, toward the ceiling, toward anything but herself. Finally she spun around and stormed out. The glass doors slid closed behind her like punctuation. I returned to my chair in the library. The tea was cold now, but I wasn't. Later that afternoon Henry stopped by. I told him everything. She drove all this way just to be denied at the door, he said, shaking his head. She must have expected a different version of you. She expected the old version, I replied. The one who thought silence meant peace. Henry nodded slowly. That version's gone. We walked out to the garden together. I carried a tray with 2 iced lemonades the staff had set out for us. I didn't need to explain any further. They already knew. I settled onto my favorite bench, the one with ivy climbing its legs in the koi pond just beyond. A soft breeze rustled the leaves. Emily had come looking for something. Control, maybe an apology, maybe a reversal. She left with nothing. Because I had nothing left to give her. Not guilt, not permission, not even my attention. And the peace I felt didn't come from winning. It came from the sound of footsteps leaving without any doors opening behind them. I reached over and gently squeezed Henry's hand. I don't think I'm afraid of her anymore, I whispered. Henry smiled. That, he said softly, means she's truly gone. 2 days later Henry called me just after breakfast. It's time, he said. Do you still want to sell the house? I didn't hesitate. Yes. He met me an hour later at Willowbrook Pines carrying a file folder. Inside were the full title deed, my notarized identity verification and a trust form, blank, but ready to protect everything Emily thought belonged to her. We sat together on the sun porch, papers spread between us. She's going to come completely unglued, I said. Henry smirked. Let her. Unglued means exposed. Line after line I signed. Print. Initial. Signature. Cliff would have teased me for the way my tongue stuck out a little when I focused. But this wasn't just a sale, it was a severing. The house Emily lived in, claimed as hers, bragged about to her friends, it had never been hers. Sure, she painted the walls. Bought a new couch on my credit. Changed out door handles. Picked fancy tile. But the bones, the foundation, that was always mine. My name. Always had been. We filed the trust paperwork quietly. The property was transferred into the Martha Reynolds Irrevocable Living Trust. Not because I feared a lawsuit but because I wanted something bulletproof. Not even a manipulative daughter could claw her way into this one. By the next day the title had officially shifted. Emily didn't know it yet but the law did. And something else was already in motion. With the help of the financial abuse specialist Henry connected me to, I filed a request to freeze all transactions linked to my original accounts. Every transaction from the last 6 months would be flagged. The specialist looked up at me. Do you have backup evidence? I have 12 pages, I said, handing her the notepad where I documented every date, every suspicious withdrawal, every strange purchase. She flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising higher with each entry. You weren't just being used, she said softly. You were being harvested. I didn't flinch. I already knew. And now so did the law. When I returned to Willowbrook Pines I felt something unfamiliar. Not joy, not yet. But breath. Like my chest wasn't clenched just to stay polite. Back in my room, I pulled out the envelope Cliff had left for me the year before he passed. I had never opened it. It sat at the bottom of my keepsake box, marked in his handwriting. Only when you're tired of pretending you're okay. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a short note. Martha, if they ever make you feel smaller than the woman I married, don't argue. Don't explain. Just leave. You don't owe anyone the right to dim your light. Use what's yours and make sure they can't take it again. Underneath was a check, uncashed, for $10,000. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed. A real aching laugh that made my ribs hurt. He knew. Even then, Cliff had known that sometimes the world turns on you, even family. I called Henry. You busy? I asked. For you? Never. Then let's sell a house, I said. And open a trust no one can touch. Henry paused. You ready for the fallout? I looked around my room, the koi pond sparkling, my bridge scarf hanging on the chair, the sun flooding through the window. Yes, I said. Because this time I'm not reacting. I'm reclaiming. And that check. I deposited it that afternoon. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted the world to know. I wasn't done building. Emily always thought she'd get the last word. He counted on it. Her voice louder, her texts longer, her threats always dressed up as guilt and concern. She thought silence was surrender. So when the letter arrived, thick with legal tone, sealed and official, I imagine she stood in her doorway for a long time before daring to open it. And when she did, the lock slammed shut without me ever having to say a word. Inside was the formal notice from the trust's legal team. Effective immediately, Emily Dawson is no longer authorized to access any accounts, property, or financial records belonging to Martha Reynolds. It was short, cold, professional. No blame. No pleading. Just boundaries. And that's what drove her mad. She called me 7 times that day. I didn't answer. On the 8th, she left a voicemail. Mom, this is ridiculous. You're listening to him instead of your own daughter. Do you even understand what you're doing? You're throwing away your family. Family. She used that word like armor. Like it should have been enough to erase everything she had done. The pressure, the manipulation, the theft. But family isn't immunity. It's a privilege. And she lost that privilege the moment she poured scalding coffee on my lap and blamed me for flinching. I forwarded the voicemail to Henry just in case. Then I did something simple but powerful. I mailed her nothing. No reply. No explanation. I let the paperwork speak, drawing the line in ink and law where my voice had once failed. Henry called that evening. She got it, didn't she? Oh, she got it, I said, sipping chamomile from my favorite chipped mug. You can always tell when they realize the power is gone. He chuckled. You didn't even flinch. Why would I? I answered. I already buried the version of me who explained herself. That night I slept with the windows open. The breeze smelled like rain. And in my dreams I wasn't hiding anymore. I stood in the middle of that house. My house, holding the keys I never surrendered. Emily was nowhere to be found. No shouting. No begging. Just echoes. The next morning I found a small white envelope slipped under my door at Willowbrook Pines. Handwritten, no return address. I knew it was from her. I didn't open it. I tore it in half and dropped it straight into the shredder at the front desk. Because this time I wasn't curious. This time I didn't need to hear another empty apology followed by another selfish request. This time I trusted the silence more than her words. And silence, when chosen, is its own kind of power. Later that afternoon, Henry stopped by with more documents. Trust updates, protected account listings, and a few emergency contact numbers in case I ever needed direct lines to law enforcement or the trust officer. As I signed the last form, Henry looked up at me. You know, he said gently, you've done something most people never get the chance to do. What's that? I asked. You ended the cycle. Not with a bang. Not with screaming. With a locked door and a clean name. I leaned back in my chair and for the first time since Cliff died, I let myself believe I had finally come home, to myself. It happened on a Thursday just after lunch when the halls of Willowbrook Pines were quiet, and the sun cast that soft golden glow over everything. The same light that always danced across the koi pond before dusk. I was sitting on the garden bench with Marjorie, both our hands resting on a folded quilt between us. We had just finished our usual conversation about the bridge tournament schedule, and how none of the new ladies seemed to shuffle the cards properly. Henry was due to join us soon. That's when I saw them, Emily and Dylan, making their way up the curved brick path that led to the front entrance. Emily's walk was furious, too fast, sharp with anger. Dylan trailed behind, slouched and bored, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his hoodie, wearing that entitled look that still made my stomach tighten, even before I remembered the $5,000 coffee incident. They were coming for a showdown. But what they didn't know was that I had nothing left to lose. The security guard noticed them first. Doris, bless her sharp eyes and steady stance, stepped out from behind the front desk before they could even reach the door. I watched as Emily gestured wildly, pointing toward the back garden, no doubt demanding to be let in. Dylan shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and rolled his eyes. Doris stood firm. I didn't get up. I didn't run. I didn't even flinch. Marjorie glanced at the entrance and whispered, "Should I call Henry?" "No," I said softly. "Let her see me calm." I wanted Emily to witness what peace looked like. Peace that wasn't begging for her approval. Finally, she spotted me through the glass. She tried to move past the desk. Doris stepped in again. Emily's voice rose. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew their shape. Rage, desperation, that familiar blend of panic when control slips away. Then Dylan noticed me too. His eyes locked with mine. And for a moment I saw it, not guilt, not love, but fear. Not because he missed me, but because the money was gone and he knew I wouldn't be milked anymore. Doris raised her hand and pointed firmly back toward the parking lot. Emily threw her arms up. Dylan muttered something under his breath and turned away first. Good. Let the boy lead for once. Emily stood there another moment, stiff, her arms rigid at her sides, her face pale with fury. For the briefest moment, her lips trembled as she mouthed a single word. Mom. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't rise. I sat right there on that bench, holding Marjorie's hand, wrapped in the same quilt Cliff used to drape over me when I'd fall asleep on the couch watching Jeopardy reruns. They left. I watched until all that remained were their shadows on the driveway, until the car rumbled away, taking with it everything that once held my entire life. Marjorie exhaled. You didn't even blink. I smiled. I already said goodbye. They're just now hearing it. Later, Henry arrived with a small paper bag of scones and a fresh bouquet from his garden. I told him what happened. They'll try again, he said. I know, I nodded. But I won't. That night, I sat at my little desk and wrote in my journal. When they came with fury, I stayed with peace. That's how you know it's over, when you no longer need to yell back. I tore the page out and slipped it into a small frame beside my bed. Because the next time they came looking for a reaction, all they would find was a reflection of themselves, on the other side of a locked door. 2 days later it arrived. A small ivory envelope, hand-addressed, placed inside my Willowbrook Pines mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable, Emily's, her perfect cursive, just slanted enough to pretend at elegance. I stood there for a full minute, not because I didn't know what was inside, but because I did. Marjorie saw me standing frozen, letter in one hand, coffee in the other. From her? She asked softly. I nodded. Want me to open it for you? No, I said. I don't need anyone else to see this lie. I didn't open it right there. Instead, I carried it upstairs, placed it carefully on the small writing desk where Cliff used to sit. I waited until the sunlight reached the far window, just like it used to when I helped him with taxes and letters to his old war buddies. Then I sat down, took a breath, and opened it. The first word. Mom. Not dear Mom, not I'm sorry, just Mom, as if she still held the right to call me that. The opening paragraph was exactly what I expected. A few shaky attempts at regret, how things got out of hand, how she never meant for me to feel pushed aside, how everything happened so quickly. She used the word misunderstanding like a band-aid. Then came the real reason for the letter. We're having a hard time now. Bills piling up. Dylan didn't qualify for the car loan after all. There was the ask. As always, the apology was bait and I was supposed to swallow it, like I used to back when I believed in second chances without proof. But I wasn't the woman who once let Emily reorganize my mail and call it kindness. I wasn't the woman who softened every instinct just to keep the peace. I had made peace with something else. Now I understood something I hadn't before. Not every daughter is a blessing. Some are warnings. The letter ended with, maybe we can talk. I really miss you. We all do. I closed the page and stared at the envelope. It was thick like she had tucked something extra inside. I reached in and pulled out a personal check, drawn from one of the old joint accounts Emily had set up, just to help simplify things. It was uncashed, the corner slightly torn. $3,500 written in the memo. Car repairs. I hadn't written it. But my name was printed on it, clear as day. She must have kept it. Or forged it. Or both. It didn't matter which. What mattered was that this wasn't an olive branch. It was bait. Bait dangled with fake tears and a familiar signature. I folded the check in half, then again and again until it vanished into my palm, like every empty promise she'd ever made. I walked it straight to the shredder. No words. No hesitation. Just paper turning to dust. I left the envelope open on my desk. Let it sit there like a carcass. A reminder that not every letter deserves an answer. Later that afternoon, Henry arrived with his usual lemon cake. He saw the open envelope and raised an eyebrow. She tried again, I said, handing him the rest of the letter. He read it silently, then handed it back. She still thinks you're a mark. Not anymore, I replied. That night I didn't write in my journal. I didn't need to. The words had already formed in my head. I don't care what you meant. What you did was enough. The call came just after dawn. I was up early watching the koi glide through the morning mist, a cup of hot water steeping beside me. Henry's voice was calm but firm. The trust flagged another forged check, he said. Same account. Same signature. You didn't write it. I know, I said. She sent me one last week. There was a pause. Well, he added, now the bank knows too. Turns out Emily had made one last attempt to dip into my old accounts. But this time the trust's protections locked her out, and left a paper trail. Withdrawals. Signatures. Emails from her IP address. Even a voice message she'd left for a bank rep, asking for my account balance, as if she still had any right to my name. She wasn't subtle anymore. She was desperate. Henry continued. The financial abuse specialist filed a report with the Elder Protection Unit. Investigators are reviewing it as we speak. My chest didn't tighten. It expanded. Because finally I knew, I hadn't just escaped. I'd set the trap. A few hours later, 2 plainclothes officers arrived at Willowbrook Pines. Not for Emily, for a quiet interview with me. They were respectful kind. One took notes while the other asked about my records, my journal, the transaction history. I handed over copies, neatly itemized, fully highlighted. I was ready. Before they left, the younger officer said, "You're not the first, Mrs. Reynolds. But you're one of the few who caught it in time." I almost corrected him. It wasn't early. But it was early enough. By noon, I received confirmation. Emily was under investigation for financial misconduct, elder fraud, and forgery. Dylan's name had also come up, tied to at least one suspicious transaction. I didn't rejoice. I didn't mourn. I simply sat in the garden and thought about every time she'd said, "You're lucky to have me," while rearranging my entire life into something that only served her. She always treated me like a locked door she already held the keys to. She never imagined I'd change the locks. But I had. Later that afternoon, Marjorie arrived with warm banana bread and 2 mugs of ginger tea. He knew. Everyone at Willowbrook Pines knew, not because I told them but because they watched the storm roll in and saw me remain seated through it. "Do you think she'll be arrested?" Marjorie asked softly. "I don't know," I said. "And it's not my decision anymore. That's what freedom feels like. Not vengeance, distance." Emily had already lost the one thing she couldn't forge back. Access. Access to me. To my name. To my mind. To my life. She hadn't just lost money, she lost the game. Because when you gamble on someone's silence and they finally speak, that's when you realize you were never really winning. Later that night, Henry and I sat together on the back patio under a deep navy sky. He poured us each a small glass of wine. "She underestimated you every step of the way," he said. "I underestimated me too," I replied. He raised his glass. "To recalculating." We clinked glasses and I said something I hadn't said in years, but knew was finally true. I'm safe. Not just from Emily, but from ever needing to explain myself to anyone who mistook my kindness for surrender. That night I slept with the window open again. And when the wind picked up, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like applause.